Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome and thank you for joining this CompTIA Project Plus episode. I'm your host, Cherokee Boos. If you've been following along, you'll notice that this is a continuation of our previous episode where we were looking at our different types of tools that we had available to us, our project management tools. We only got to take a look at some graphs, so we're going to go ahead and pick up here. And with us today, we have Mr. Ronnie Wong. Thank you for joining us today, Ronnie.
Well, thank you for having me back on the show as we continue on taking a look at some of the different tools that we're going to see that's going to really help us in project management, because a lot of times the idea here of making decisions is not something you should ever take lightly, of course, in project management, but you need to make an informed decision, which requires you to be able to gather a lot of data, be able to analyze a lot of data, so that way you know exactly where to spend your money, where to actually put your resources, so that you can actually control the actual cost and time, as well as the scope of the project too. So previously we had taken a look at some charts and even some of the, or at least one, which is the one that I'm more familiar with, Microsoft Project, as a part of taking a look at some of the software and tools that are available, and talk about when and why you would actually use some of those different charts. Today we're continuing on to take a look at what we call the idea here of some type of project management dashboard, or a status type of report that we want to take a look at as well. Okay? So let me show you an example of one of these so that we can talk about it a little bit more. Okay? Now this is one I simply downloaded off the internet here as a generic copy of one. And so when you start taking a look at the information that we see right here, I'm trying to pull it out so that we can see it just a little bit better. Okay? So what is the idea of the dashboard? The dashboard essentially shows us what metrics or the idea of performance things that we can actually take a look at over our entire project here. Okay? So over here on the left-hand side, we do have something like what we'd call an entry table, right? Where we can see the individual task and who's actually assigned to that task, and even the status over here where it's actually marked as complete. You actually have completed your work. Okay?
Yay.
So you're actually good at this one. But notice I can also see down here where there's actually work, but it hasn't actually started yet. Okay? So we can actually keep a track of just that as the basic beginning of things as we start to see that. Now, along with that, we also talk about the use of a Gantt chart. So you might also use this. Now, this one is not as detailed and full of the information as what we'd normally see in something like Microsoft Project, but it at least lets you know like where everything actually starts and ends in comparison to the actual timeline that's given here. Now behind all this you might be saying, well, where the heck is all the data going now, or coming from? Well, if you're the project manager, you might also be keeping this type of information and data inside of an Excel workbook, and that's what this is just a simple Excel workbook. And instead everything is actually happening here on this end of it, which is another tab, and this is where all the data is entered in tabular form at some place. And then it even has some percentage complete, some pending items, some other information that we see right here. But we take that and we create charts inside of Excel to help us to manage that a little bit better. I can even see the budget comparisons, and we'll be talking about some of this information. The planned budget versus what we've actually spent so far. Also, we can take a look at the overall task status in a very graphical form. And I've separated out this piece to show the percentage of completion versus those that have yet to start. And right now, even other pending decisions that need to be made. And that way you know at a quick glance how your project's doing. Now, these particular types of dashboards can get a little bit out of hand. And by that, what I mean is you can put so much data on there that it can get a little bit clunky. What you want to do is pick kind of maybe your top 10 or top 5 charts or different pieces of information that you really want to see, let's say at the beginning of the day, and that you need to track throughout the day. So a lot of times your software may allow you to create a dashboard exactly like this inside of the software itself by creating different reports and layouts in the way that they want. Or you can do it manually like the way that I have shown here, which you just keep separate individual tabs where you put the data on and tell it that you want it to display the chart form of the information right here on that first page.
Or like here at IT Pro TV, we have those pillars with the actual flat screens mounted on the columns there, and we just have intermittent, the screen changes with the different metrics that are shown.
Right, yeah, the idea here, of course, is keep metrics right there available for you and what you need to do. For project managers, they need to be on top of the data at all points. It helps also for your project team to actually understand where they are as well, if you can actually keep this information in front of them too. So it's a quick way to glance and hopefully be able to take a look from the information that you're given here, decisions that need to be made, and make them actually informed based on the data that you're given, okay? But that, of course, requires you to be a great project manager in terms of communication, getting the data back in so that you can then fill it in and then see the analysis of it in terms of charts and know what to do next. So it's a great tool, something that we should not overlook just because we think, oh, what's the big deal with fancy charts? But they can really help you out when you really need to take a look at a tremendous amount of data in a single dashboard. Instead of having to flip through page after page after page or even tab after tab, it gives you a nice comparison right here and a nice sampling of all your data. Okay?
Very cool.
All right, so that moves us into another area then when we start to take a look at other tools that are available, okay? Now, this area we're not really going to actually show anything. We do need to talk about what we call, of course, knowledge management tools, okay? Now, this is where it becomes a little bit more of the ethereal and the artistic side of project management, okay? Now, when we start talking about the idea of project management and knowledge management tools, okay, what we're actually saying is that we as project managers need to be able to have at our benefit or our resource, right, the correct tools that are available, okay, to make sure that we're getting the right information directly to the right people inside of our projects, okay? And if you're an old school type of project manager, the way that you simply did this is that you communicated through the hierarchy of the organization, right? So you as a project manager, you may have a daily status meeting with your team project leaders and the coordinator and the scheduler, okay? That's how it may begin at the beginning of the day. And that way, you know that if you need to push, you push. You know if you need information so that you can make another decision, you make that information. And then that is then distributed through those team leaders as well. And those team leaders then, of course, gather their teams together, and then they start distributing the information. It is a very effective trickle-down effect. But at times, though, that effect can take a long time before anything really gets rolling and in action, okay? The great thing is you are now actually in, what, the second decade of the 21st century, okay? And that more than likely means that you have been affected by the internet at some particular point in time.
This day and age, everyone wants everything now, and we have that accessibility due to social media and technology.
All right, so more than likely what you'll end up seeing, especially in today's world, is that your company may have what we call an intranet, okay? So that's different from the internet, which we are going to discuss in just a moment here. But an intranet essentially is an internal network site that you can allow your employees or your team members to, at the beginning of the day, simply log into it and get the relevant information for their particular team on where they might be assigned that day, or information on the materials that are actually here and available for whatever task is actually on hand. Date information, you might even see weather-related information. It really turns out to be
Human resource portal.
Yeah, it turns out to be maybe even a human resource portal as well. There's a lot of information there, even to the point where instead of somebody having to come to the project scheduler, okay, and say, hey, I need some time off because I really have this injury, I've got to go and see the doctor, they can instead go to that portal and maybe click on a link that says schedule the time off, or for your PTO here, to make sure that that gets directly to who it needs to. Instead of trying to go, who is the actual scheduler on this project? They know exactly how to get there. Regulatory information or even standards that your project has to follow, all that can be built into electronic handbooks that then they can actually pull up at any time that they need to get access in and be able to see that. So you don't have to actually make sure that you told everybody correctly. You just give them access to the intranet, and from there they know that they're supposed to check daily, that the information that's there. You might even be able to leave them emails or messages that they're supposed to check through and verify that everything's coming. So you do have that ability to be able to track even daily assignments. So that intranet site is something that really helps to distribute the information much quicker. And if it's tied into your system in terms of your project management information system, you might find out that as you update your management system, it starts updating that intranet where they can actually see what progress is going on as well.
Pretty nice. It's like a one-stop shop. You can go there to get all your important information. You probably could even post some material safety data sheets there for whatever project you're working at. Any kind of changes, updates. I like it.
Yeah, it really is. It's a tool that really does bring you into the 21st century. Most of us go, oh, really? Yes, it really is. It's a great tool. Now, the other side of that, like we said, is the internet itself. Now, normally if your company has an internet website, that's great because it does give out publicly available information that everybody else might need, especially about the project itself. If people have concerns about the project, you can go ahead and essentially mount your own PR right there and say, here's what we're doing to ensure that our project is not going to affect, X, Y, Z, whatever it might be. Here's what we're doing to ensure that our project is staying within the EPA guidelines here in the United States for Environmental Protection Agency. That way they can have that, and then you can also have contact information and even just other information that the public might normally find relevant as well. Okay, a lot of times even the vendors might need some additional information. They're brand new. You might even have just the information that has a little link that says for vendors only, or vendor information where they submit here's what they're going to be delivering information on, and here's the other things that you might have, and that way they can submit that into the portal, and then everybody gets the information. You name it, an internet site is actually fairly decent if you need that for your project, usually larger projects too. Okay. Now, you may have also heard about wikis. Cherokee, do you create wikis?
I don't.
You don't? Have you ever read a wiki?
I have.
Okay. What did you read a wiki for? That's the key.
Honestly, I couldn't even tell you, Ronnie, but definitely it was probably some kind of technology. And I don't know if you're going to ask me how I feel about that.
No.
No?
No.
No.
Sure. Let's ask you. How do you feel about that?
I kind of have my own opinion about them, right?
Sure.
So I think they're great if you're already familiar with the technology or some kind of information, and you're just kind of refreshing. Because if you see information that's displayed on that page that's incorrect, you'll normally be able to remember that. At least that's what I think about it. But if you're trying to learn something that's brand new to you and you go to the wiki pages, you can't trust that information. So.
Yeah, there's sometimes where that ends up happening, and that's really bad, right? I think you're right, though. Wiki pages are really designed for somebody that's got a technical interest in whatever product that they're using. And you can imagine for something like this for your project team, okay? Let's say that they're to integrate something into the project, and the way that they do that is by buying these specialized components, okay? And all of a sudden, they realize as they're hooking something up that it doesn't really seem to work the way that they thought it would work. Well, going to those wiki pages may give you the technical specifications and information that you need to ensure that those systems are compatible. Sometimes you find out that even after purchasing everything, it's not as great as you thought it was, and it didn't work the way that you wanted to, but you check out their wiki pages, you might find the idea here of updates. So when Cherokee mentioned the notion of finding out when something's wrong and they still post it.
But Ronnie, it's on the internet.
But you may find errata. That's the key here, right? You may find errors, and
exactly.
They may post it and say, oh, here's something that everybody's tried out, and they went back, and now they're getting people reporting the errors. Well, they may actually report like we found that that is actually a glitch and a bug, and that they are working on something to help fix that. So being able to have access to these types of wikis, which can be, again, either internal wikis as well, or even external wikis, which you can create. So if you've ever used SharePoint, you've probably seen that idea of creating wikis for internal information as well, okay? That will help you out too. So make sure you take advantage of those instances if you can, okay? Now, just when you go, all right, that's plenty, but there's also the idea of the vendor own type of knowledge bases that they may also put out there on the net.
This is where I normally point people to. I mean, especially if you're studying for a Microsoft exam, what better way to get the direct information than Microsoft TechNet? Get it straight from the horse's mouth. That's how I feel.
No, that's exactly right. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of people out there that go, oh, no, don't ever go to the official site because they'll tell you one thing and then you'll figure out it works differently. That can happen, okay? But these are the people that normally have designed it and they put a knowledge base out on it. They probably tried to test out what they've actually done, and they run through and try and get you an answer that's directly from the people that really did write and design the information itself. So when you have a system like that, you're getting it exactly like what Cherokee said, from the people who made it, and they should be the authority on what you're actually seeing there. So it's a really good way for you to at least get some knowledge on whatever that piece of equipment is or process that you're following to help you to get through this.
Yeah, and also if there's any kind of industry standards like NIST or IEEE, you definitely want to check out those types of things like your RFCs, your request for comments, because it might be a little dry, a little technical, but you're going to get all the information and the accurate information. Well, hopefully.
No, yeah, usually you will, okay, but it doesn't mean that you can't stump even the vendors at times, okay? So I haven't had this with Microsoft yet, but I know that there's probably some products where I've used them in the past, and like you go and try and find like the vendor knowledge base, and they don't exist yet.
Oh,
okay?
for sure. You can
that brand
encounter
new.
your own specific problems. That
Right.
happened to us before with
Yeah,
a mail server.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely with mail servers. That's always a possibility, especially with those things, okay? Now, the last one that we want to talk about as far as a tool for the modern age, right? Not saying you have to adopt all these, not even saying you have to adopt one of them, but using these probably is going to help you to be a bit more efficient, right? Last one we want to talk about is kind of the idea of electronic collaboration, right? If you've heard people, raving about the idea of Skype for Business or SharePoint, anything like that, right? Office 365 collaboration is now Skype for Business. If you heard anything like that, right? These are tools that really do give you that ability to have the true collaborative nature that you want to. So for example, let's say that you're working on a document that's going to be released to the public on your project right away, okay? But it's between 3 or 4 different sites, and what you want to do is you want to make sure that everybody has their opinion on how this document reads and whether or not they want to make changes on it. Well, the old-fashioned way, okay, that you would normally have to do this is that you got one of 2 ideas here, right? I could just make 4 different copies of that if I had 4 different sites and just send a copy to each one and tell them, ASAP, read, send in corrections here, and then wait for draft number 2, and you continue to go back and forth.
Make sure you keep those revision numbers.
Yeah, make sure you actually find out what needs to be done, okay? It's a bit of a long process. The other one's more expensive. Instead of doing it that way, what we do, Cherokee, is that, all right, we need to get everybody that's going to be involved in the PRs on each of these sites to come here, okay? So you fly them all in for the week or for the weekend, and there it is. Now you're working on one document together, but that's insanely expensive at the same time. Not saying that you can't have a good time doing it, but at the same time, you might find out it may blow your budget.
There are better ways to spend your money, exactly.
Maybe much better ways to spend your money.
Time also, yeah.
Time, yeah, but...
Reducing your footprint, that's what it's all about, right?
Is it? Yeah. For me, I wouldn't mind actually, having a bunch of people over and just doing that for a weekend and then billing the company for it. That would be kind of neat. No, not really. Don't do that.
Tell Tim.
Yeah, don't do that. But you kind of get the idea here that this is one of those things which collaboration takes money, takes time a lot of times. But by using a system like this that we've talked about, okay, it makes the collaboration just about as live as you get, and nobody has to leave their office.
Yeah, you have that initial the expense and time, but then after that, you really are saving.
Yeah, so for example, if we're using the example that I just mentioned here, let's say it is a statement that needs to be released. Well, what I can do is actually put it, like for instance, we have Office 365. Well, I can actually open that up with Office 365 Online, with Word Online on my computer, and then I can share that document out between me and the other sites, and they can pull it up, and immediately they can start editing that document, and I can watch as it happens as I give them permissions to edit the document. And that way at the end, I can then say, all right, using Skype for Business as far as our chat goes, if we want to, or maybe even video conferencing, saying, hey, does everybody agree with the changes? And if they do, it's done. and we're actually right there and ready to go. The same thing when you do have off-site people, or you have people that are really in that position in which they cannot make that particular meeting that you want to call, and you still need to be able to have some of their input, but it's because they're involved somewhere else, but they can at least listen in and maybe provide some input in. It really is worth it in terms of collaboration, especially because you are in the 21st century. Okay, so not knocking 20th century, I'm a 20th century guy myself.
Yeah, we do have a lot of these fancy technological tools, but Ronnie, what about some old school tools that we can go ahead and implement?
Yeah, you're not gonna,
arithmetic.
yeah, that's it. The most basic types of tools that we also want to head into. So we've talked about several, right? So when it begins, okay, how do you manage the whole thing? We might use software, right, to be able to see everything, okay? Then we talked about charts that really help us to be able to spot certain elements that we want to, such as cause and effect, and even be able to talk about where do we spend the majority of our money, being able also to track usage, you name it, there's plenty of charts to help us to do that, okay? Now we've even looked at the idea of using 21st century versions of what we've talked about as well, and to make things a little bit more efficient. But sometimes you just have to do things kind of the old-fashioned way, okay? Which means, well, you have to actually use math. And the great thing is this, okay? Even though we're going to talk about them manually, you do not always have to do this manually, okay? The very fact is, these tools that we've mentioned a lot of times, especially like the project management information systems like Microsoft Project, they do it in the background for you that you don't even have to worry about what the actual calculations are. But guess what? On the CompTIA Project Plus, though, okay, you do need to at least know these formulas, and you do need to at least have a basic understanding of some of the terminology that we're going to use. And now what we're specifically looking at here are what we call different ways to measure performance, is what we're normally talking about, okay? So we normally measure in terms of a project, right? Performance based on cost, based on the idea here of time, whether we're ahead of schedule, behind schedule, whether we're ahead of or not above budget, under budget or over budget. And then, of course, even the requirement. Are we out of our scope, or are we actually within our scope as well, okay? So we're always looking for any type of indicator that shows where we're throwing off one of those constraints so that we can round everything back up and do what we need to, okay? And that at least involves us having at least the most fundamental skills in understanding some of the terms that we're going to be talking about, as well as some of those
Equations.
Equations. I couldn't remember what they were called. I was going to say formulas.
I've been looking forward to them all day.
Yes, so we'll at least get started with the terminology, right? And then we'll take a look at where that takes us, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about some of the different terminology that you are going to absolutely 100% need to know. I don't know how else to describe it, okay? Now, these particular definitions here, they are not official project management definitions. These are the basic Ronnie Wong kind of definitions, boiled down to the essence as much as you can of this simplified way that Ronnie's mind works, okay?
All right.
So when you hear the term planned value, you're more than likely to see PV, okay? So the letter P as for Peter, and then V as in Victor, okay? So you're more than likely to see that. That stands for planned value. That's exactly what we mean here, is this is how much I plan to spend on this, okay? So if I say that here it is for task, for my work breakdown structure 8.1.1, okay, that I have a PV of $1,500, well, what am I saying? I didn't spend it yet, but what? I'm planning to spend $1,500 on that particular task, okay? Everybody at this point is still with me, so I didn't actually throw any curveball at you, okay? So let's go to the opposite end of this, right? There's also AC, right? AC for us is alpha, and then C is Charlie, right? I think that's
correct.
Yeah, alpha, Charlie, okay? And so this actually stands for actual cost. Well, what the heck does that mean? It means how much did you actually spend? So see, Ronnie's mind doesn't try to get into a very technical sense of this. He tries to make sure that at least I understand what it means, okay?
I'm sure plenty of people out there can appreciate that also.
Yeah. The other term that you'll likely see, older terms that you'll find in previous editions of the PMBOK, way early, probably version 3 and maybe even version 2 of the PMBOK here, is ACWP, actual cost of work performed. That's actually meaning how much work was done and how much did you spend doing that work, okay? But the same thing here, how much did you actually spend? So if I know that I have a planned value of $1,500, okay, and at this particular point though, I realize that, hey, what I've done is I've spent $500 dollars of that. My actual cost at this point in the project is, well, $500, okay? So not exactly, the idea here of anything that's overwhelming
Trying
us.
to trick you or trip you up.
Yeah, so planned value, what I think I'm going to end up spending on this, actual cost here is what I actually have spent so far. Now, we get a little bit trickier here, okay? There's also BAC, right? BAC, Bravo, Alpha, Charlie, okay? So BAC here is budget at completion. What I expected to spend when everything was over, okay? So complete total amount. So if I have my entire project, and I said it's scheduled to actually end with $75,000, okay, is what I expect to spend overall period, okay? Well, that's what I'm going to budget for that. Doesn't mean I've spent it yet, okay? But it's what I'm expecting to spend for the entire project itself.
So would you use PV to go ahead and define smaller components of that project?
Yes, you can. You can actually say this is how much we plan to spend at each stage, and that way you know about how much you can budget at each stage to help you out as well, okay? So it really does help with these components, but I know it's kind of weird, but you need those three elements, okay? You absolutely need those three elements, and the reason why you need those three elements is because normally you're trying to calculate what we call this EV, okay? So that's Echo Victor, is that right?
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't either know. Yeah, so somebody's going to correct me on that one, okay? So
I don't remember
earned
what
value.
you said for the first two.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think those were right, but I can't remember.
Oh no, well, darn, I'm really bad at that too.
I
So
could be wrong.
Earned value is what you're looking at, okay? The value of work completed, okay? So how much did you actually work compared to, well, what did you actually expect to spend for that work? So you might find out something that you actually did spend a lot more for that same amount of work to be done than what you had planned to spend, right? So I said I was only going to spend, I'll use Cherokees again. Cherokee, we were talking about those high heels with the red bottoms on them.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know what they meant, but Cherokee said they mean thousands of dollars, okay? So let's say that Cherokee says, I expected to spend $2,000, that to me, I would cry. But let's say that she says $2,000 here, okay? But she would compare that to what she actually spent, and then she would tell me that she saved money. I know it's weird, but that's probably what she would tell me, is that she actually saved money. You wouldn't do that to me.
They were a really good deal.
Yeah, they were a really good deal. Yeah, something like that. But that's the same thing that happens here, right? Is that we need to actually be able to evaluate, right, what we've actually completed at this point and what the value of that is at that point in completion, okay? And that's what we call the idea of earned value here, okay? And the only way you can do that is if you know exactly what you had planned to spend, okay, versus what you actually did spend, okay? So that way, at that point in your project, you know how much value you actually have into the project at that point in time versus how much it actually should be at that point in time according to your budget, okay? So there's a lot of information here, and it's kind of strange, and this is what's going to kind of bug us as if project manager, if this is your first one here, is that this actually opens up into
Our equations.
4
I'm
or
ready.
5
Yeah.
different equations
We're
at least.
setting you guys up for success.
7 or 8
right
different
here.
equations.
That's what's happening right now.
Yep.
So be familiar with these terms.
Be familiar with these terms as we head into that. But Cherokee, I think that at this particular point in time, I've actually run out of time again.
It's all right, Ronnie. It happens to the best of us. In this episode, we were able to take a look at different types of technological platforms that we can go ahead and integrate into our project so that we can have a more streamlined, efficient process. And you also introduced us to the terms that we need to know before we continue with our equations. So thank you guys at home for tuning in with us today. We have a lot more Project Plus coming your way. I'm Cherokee Boos.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
Signing off.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.